Patrick Schumacker, executive producer of Abbott Elementary on ABC. I read a feature, Patrick, about the show, and Carrie Burke, president of 20th Television, said of the thousands of pitches that she's ever heard in her career, Quinta's pitch for Abbott Elementary was the only one that made her cry. I thought it's such a great little anecdote. And I think it really speaks to the show because it's so funny, but also so emotional. And I guess, can you talk about that heartfelt nature and making sure that's so present with the comedy, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all kind of starts with Quinta Brunson, who created the show, stars in the show, saying obvious things, but her mother was a school teacher, elementary school teacher in the Philadelphia school district for 40 years. And so, it all comes from a real place and a desire to show things kind of as they are. And we've definitely had, we've had an overwhelmingly positive response from the educational community. And a lot of teachers have said, aside from it being very funny, that sometimes it's very hard to watch because it's very real. And some teachers have, been tortured by it because it does hit a little close to home. But that was always a really important kind of, mandate for us going into this, that we didn't want it to become a cartoon. We didn't want it to be broad, which is ironic, the cartoon statement, because initially Quinta's idea for it, she came to us with it as an animated show. This was like several years ago, still like done in sort of a mockumentary style, but it was more of a function of scheduling purposes. But then, serendipity happened and our schedules all freed up, and both us, meaning Justin Halper and my partner and myself, and Quinta, kind of almost at the same time, like 1, 2, 3, like broadcast live action mockumentary format. We all kind of like had the exact same idea moving forward when we got like a second chance to develop the show. So yeah, I mean, we didn't want to, we went into it not wanting the show to be preachy. We didn't want the show to be about issues. Of course, like they will arise given the the setting, but we didn't want to kind of hit it over the head, and so we weren't going to shy away from the real struggles that can afflict our school systems. So yeah.
So you mentioned there like how it's obviously a broadcast show. I think one of the things that is striking about Abbott Elementary is that it's really like in the zeitgeist. I feel like it has a cool factor that you would maybe associate now with like a cable show or a streaming show, but it is very cool to have it on network. And I guess, can you talk about why that was the right spot for it, and like that, like a network show at this point? Because I guess maybe just, I can't imagine it's just that they said yes. I guess like what was like, why is it better as like a network show than a streaming show or a cable show or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we always kind of went after it as a network show. We were thinking about pitching it to streamers kind of in addition to, but like the response was pretty strong right out of the gates, with ABC making a very generous offer. I think part of it is just there are like so many stories to tell with an ensemble this big, and it didn't feel like it was something that needed to be limited to 10 episodes a season. We felt like it could be more episodic in nature. We felt like, given sort of the subject matter and the setting, that it was something that would be appealing for sort of 4 quadrants and like the largest audience possible. And also, I think it came down to, Quinta is such a huge fan. I mean, we all are, but Quinta is like a super fan of shows like particularly The Office, Parks and Rec as well, and just was dying to do something that was kind of in that spirit. And so it felt like a no-brainer to first kind of go down the path of the network, the broadcast network show. And it seemed like a natural fit the second that we got into these rooms to pitch. So, and especially like with ABC, it's like with Erin Werenberg and her team over there, Wendy Steinhoff, we've known them for over a decade. When they were at Warner Brothers, they gave us Justin and myself, our first gig. And so it just felt like, oh, this was like kismet to like come together with them again, now on sort of the side of, the buyer. And they were familiar with Quinta as well. And it was kind of serendipity how the whole thing came together.
So you mentioned like The Office and Parks and Rec, obviously the mockumentary format. Like those shows, I feel like the cast is so, it's like the format helps the cast even like explode further, right? Like it's like creating stars almost. Obviously, like a Cheryl Lee Ralph is an incredible famous actress and like very well known, but a lot of the other people, maybe this is the first time audiences are experiencing them or have seen them before. How much does the casting inform the characters in that case, or vice versa, I guess?
It's funny, like we really didn't like the casting process on broadcast shows, especially, I think can be really sort of painstaking. And we were really lucky that like to a person, like we I think I want to say with every role, either we just were able to make an offer right out of the gates, or the person who read for the studio and network was like the only person that read for it that we brought to the network. It's definitely at the network stage. So it just felt kind of natural. Like Janelle, in particular, was someone I was completely unfamiliar with her. You know, she was a writer on Black Monday. She'd written on Central Park for Apple, and like she just walked in and just immediately kind of exuded every quality of Ava that we wanted. And then, you know, in the middle of shooting the season, she was like, this character is just like me. So I think a lot of it was, as with most of these things, was just kind of dumb luck. But yeah, I think we're pretty pretty open and pretty I like one of our mantras going in is that, you know, once you have cast that actor, you know, write to their strengths or write to the things that you want to see that particular actor do. And it might mean pivoting a little bit away from you know, what you originally envisioned from the character. But I mean, we didn't have to pivot very hard. I mean, Tyler was someone that Quinta was familiar with, who plays Gregory on the show. She had worked with him on Black Lady Sketch Show and had just known him socially and was like, you know, talking to him on the phone like prior to you know, the casting process about it. So it was you know, it was a very easy process. And yeah, we just you know, we've been able to, we've had the fortune of, you know, socializing with the actors outside of work as well, and have gotten to know them, and have, you know, I hopefully been you know, respectful and constantly kind of in dialogue with them about what we want to do with their characters, and everybody's been really on board so far.
It is a great cast. I'm glad you mentioned Janelle James as Principal Ava. She is like legit LOL sitting and watching the show. And I guess I was reading, I think it's another article. It was like, oh, like the premise was like, let Principal Ava remain terrible, I think was the headline or something, like, because she's obviously such a great foil, I guess, going into like, you know, not to spoil like a season 2, but like, how do you balance like humanizing her, which I think the show did really well, especially in like the latter stage of the season, with keeping her, making sure she retains that edge, I guess, going forward, because she is so funny and such a great mix, because the show is so sweet, obviously, as well. And I think that's a good, I wouldn't wonder, how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, well, we're only a few weeks into the season 2 writers room, so, you know, anything that we've done is obviously subject to change. But
sure,
I think, you know, one of the things right off the bat is, you know, Ava did, you know, kind of have her moment at the end of season 1, but I think maybe she's the type of person that would take the wrong lessons from that. And maybe she could, you know, after sort of, you know, getting away with what she got away with by the end, but also knowing that her subordinates, if you will, like have her back, like maybe she will double down with what she thinks she can get away with moving forward. So yeah, I think
okay.
I think that's probably the direction that we want to move into. Because yeah, you don't want, I mean, it's only season 2, right? You want like
Right.
12 seasons.
Well,
incremental movement on these characters.
no, that's good. And I guess, Leslie, you mentioned like earlier how it was maybe like the idea of maybe doing it from an animated perspective. When I watch a show, I'm consistently shocked that you have all these kids obviously in the classrooms. Like, so I'd imagine that's challenging, plus doing it during the pandemic, and not to belabor that, but I watch it, I'm like, how do they do this? How complicated is that from like a production aspect to have the kids, but not even have them be like, you know, they're not like central hip, you know, they're not, you know, they're there, but they're not like, you know, there, I guess. I just think it's like fascinating.
Well, the kids are all CG. I don't know if you knew that, but you know, I mean, it's really a testament to, you know, Randall Einhorn, who's our producing director, executive producer, who comes from The Office. He was the original DP of The Office, went on to direct countless episodes of The Office. And we also brought on people from The Office like Jen Salata, who directed a few episodes. She was a writer on, I think, pretty much every season of The Office. But anyways, Randall has kind of created an ecosystem in which we are really nimble and really, we are able to, I mean, our shoot days are, they're under 12 hours. Oftentimes they're about 10 hours or so. And that is partially a function of that we do have so many kids, right? And they have limited amounts of hours. I mean, forget the COVID protocol, right? If we were living in sort of an, pre-COVID world, it would still be a real, puzzle to kind of get everybody in and out. But, Randall and our first ADs are super adept at making sure that we move. We shoot everything with 3 cameras other than, with the exception of the talking heads, which is just 1. But, we are constantly doing scenes with 3 cameras with, everything's pretty much handheld or, seated, but still like on a stool with rollerblade wheels. I should know the name of this contraption. It's genius. But anyways, it's sort of nimbleness that allows us to knock out all of these scenes with like all of these kids. And then, like a COVID protocol, obviously, complicated things as well. But our COVID team did an outstanding job. We never once had any major instances. There was nothing in like zone A. We never shut down, knock on wood that continues. But I remember there was like an article that came out in Deadline about there being some like COVID positive tests. And I freaked because like that was the first I had heard of it. And I was like, well, I should be like one of the first people to know. And then it turned out that it was somebody it was a couple of people in like zone C who like never even, make it to the proximity of the zone A that would necessitate like a shutdown. So we got very lucky. I have a lot of friends, running other shows that were not so lucky, but that's just a testament to our COVID team and the crew and the cast for being extremely vigilant in that first season.
Well, it's a great show. Abbott Elementary, ABC. You can watch all the episodes on Hulu as well, I believe, and streaming as well. So thank you, Patrick, for doing this.
Thank you.
Jennifer Flanz, executive producer of The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and a 7-time Emmy winner among 15 nominations. Jennifer, you went through so many transitions with The Daily Show. I wanted to ask you about the most recent one, obviously going back to having an audience after having no audience for 2 years. The show was at home and then into studio and then bringing the audience back for this recent episodes. How much has it changed as The Daily Show from the last time you had an audience to now? And how, do you think about it differently and stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. It's really interesting. It is surprisingly different than when we left in March 2020 because we had done 2 iterations between then and now. So we learned so much from just being the home show that we did with Trevor, which was obviously out of necessity. And the audience was super forgiving, so we could just mess around and try things. And then when we went back to the small studio to be COVID safe without an audience, we, again, there's no live audience. So we got to practice and try things that are a little like sillier than I think we would have done in front of a live audience back in the before times. But some of them worked. So we brought them with us to the studio in the hopes that the studio audience would be into it, knowing that the home audience was, and it worked, but it's been really an interesting evolution just to see how these things have, grown. And we really were able to focus on Trevor's strengths, and take like the DNA of The Daily Show, which we had, 20 somewhat years of before the pandemic. And then in the apartment version of the show, really take that and mesh it together with things that we knew Trevor was really good at. And so we've now been able to evolve the show beyond just, Trevor hosting The Daily Show. Now it really feels like it's Trevor's, iteration of the show.
So I'm glad you said that too. I think so also. I mean, like this is to the most broad brush. I'm like, I think when Jon Stewart was the host, I love Jon Stewart so much, incredibly, known for maybe his cynicism and stuff. And I feel like Trevor comes in and he has, I was trying to figure out what it is. And I feel like it's a passion about making people understand the world in a different fashion, or making them understand how the world is, it can be different than it is. And I guess, how do you guys view the show then, from that, using that as the guidepost, with retaining, like you said, the DNA of the Daily Show, but that slight pivot between the two men, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're very similar and yet very, very different. And I think Trevor has the, you know, the ability to come in and look at this all from a very different point of view, because he is not from here. He did not grow up here. He didn't grow up with this two political party system. And he really can look at it as an outsider. And that in itself, and that, you know, that's been since he got here day one, but that's really helped evolve the show in a lot of ways. And whereas, you know, before we, you know, he just kind of enlightened a lot of us that worked there for a long time to being able to look at a lot of the issues from different sides. And that in the Trump era and the new, you know, kind of even more divided country than it was when John was on the show. And by the way, at that time, I couldn't have imagined anything getting more divided than under Bush, but like, well, here we are. And having somebody that can really shed light on things in a different way, as somebody that's come in from the outside and is now, you know, living here for a long time, has just been, it's been really interesting, and it gives you a certain empathy for both sides of every argument, and really spills over from government to social issues to, you know, to almost every issue we're looking at from every side. And we oftentimes use the room, you know, in the morning just to hash out, and kind of, we all take different points of view, even if they're not necessarily our own. We're always playing devil's advocate and trying to get to the best place to represent, you know, whatever Trevor's point of view would be on it.
That's great to hear. And I think that comes through in the show. The other thing I love about the Daily Show is I feel like for years it was like, you know, a punchline maybe that young people are getting their news from the Daily Show, right? Like, I feel like that, it's just to generalize it. Now I'm like, it heartens me, because I feel like the Daily Show does a great job of contextualizing the news, but also as like almost like an ombudsman for the mainstream media, because I feel like a lot of times Trevor is able to speak truth to power there as well. Do you guys think of it as like, I mean, do you now think of the show more of a media watchdog even as well as a news outlet? Than, you know what I mean? Like, how do you guys think about it?
It's so funny. I mean, we think about it as comedy first, right? Like, it's a comedy show and we want to make jokes, but we do hold ourselves to like a pretty high journalistic standard, making sure that everything is fact checked, and we are no fake news on our show. We are, you know, there's jokes and then we're putting out information, and that's it. But I would say, you know, back in the day, I used to laugh when people would say, oh, you know, young people get their news from the Daily Show, and be like, oh, if you get your news from the Daily Show, you're missing half the jokes. We're a parody show, whatever. And now I just think, well, at least kids are getting their news from somewhere, you know. Like, I'm glad it's not just Twitter and like, you know, click headlines. So the hope is, you know, that they watch the Daily Show or clips of the Daily Show wherever they're aggregated online and on social, and then get interested in the headline or the topic, and then go Google around for it, you know, and learn more. And that would be the hope, you know, is that they then do their own research, come up with their own opinions on things. But kind of, I'm glad that it's a show that gets, you know, younger people or whoever interested in learning about what's going on in the world around them, honestly.
For sure. The other, you mentioned that, like, the digital, I feel like the digital aspect of the show is so big, and you guys do such a great job of like getting the clips seemingly in front of where people are. Like you mentioned, how does it work? Like, how do you guys handle like breaking news? Like how, like when like the, you know, when like the Politico reports on like, you know, the Supreme Court release a, you know, overturning Roe versus Wade or a draft of that, like that happens at like Monday night at like 8 o'clock or whatever. How do you guys mobilize from there and make sure you're getting stuff out online immediately versus like getting it on the show the next day? And how does it all work, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we are constantly, I hate to make us all sound like a bunch of losers, but we are constantly in contact with each other. We are on everything. We're on Slack, we're on email, we're on WhatsApp, we're on text, we're on a million chains with each other. And that's everyone from like our expansion team, which is our social and digital team. As you know, our writers, our producers, our directors, and then, you know, Trevor is on most of these chains as well. We're just, and our correspondents, like we're always throwing around, wow, did you see this just happen? And that can be anything from a giant news story that's breaking, like the Roe v. Wade leak, or just, hey, did you see what Elon Musk just tweeted? So we're a little bit immersed in it, which I always think is very good, because I think as a person, I would have been, you know, had I not worked at the Daily Show, I would have been a person at the office that was by the water cooler being like, did you see this? Did you see this? You know, so at least now I work with a ton of people that say, did you see this? And we get to do it together. But, you know, with specific to a story like that breaks at like an 8 o'clock hour, well, we already taped the show for that night, right? That's already hopefully by then finalized. We're just finishing the edit and it's going out. But we have all of these other ways of reaching our audience now. And so we quickly, you know, we'll come up with the best tweet or take for that. If it warrants it, sometimes we'll grab one of the correspondents and do a quick video. You know, we make Desi the head of the CDC or something. And you know, we did that when the mask mandate changed, I think. But, you know, so we have this great cast of, you know, our news team is amazing. So any one of them could step in depending on what point of view we think the joke works best from, or Trevor. But generally at like a late night thing like that, we'll probably just put out a tweet and then, but immediately start talking about what does the next day look like, right? Like who from the news team is best comment on it, what points of view are we representing? And actually, with a story like the Roe versus Wade leak, what happened was you know, I immediately said to Trevor, do we want to get somebody for tomorrow on the show as a guest? Do we want to talk to somebody? And that oftentimes is the way we'd want to cover a story that's that big, is let's talk to an expert. But it was also like, oh, let's give it a beat. Let's wait till the morning, sleep on it, and see where this lands, because it was a leak. It wasn't a decision, right? So we wanted to see, where does this land tomorrow? And it landed in a very sad place, obviously. And that's when we decided we would, you know, so yeah. I think we brought on Senator Klobuchar that day to speak about it. And we had already booked Bill Gates, who had plenty to say on it as well. And we made sure to use Desi, who's super passionate about the topic and came with a lot of great jokes and tears. And Trevor, you know, covering it with the most, you know, thoughtful ways to cover it, I think.
Yeah, it's incredible. Hearing you talk about it is so great. And I think that's what makes the Daily Show after all these 20 years. Jennifer Flanz, thank you so much, executive producer of the Daily Show. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ellen Rapoport, creator of Minx on HBO Max, about a young female journalist feminist who joins forces with a low-rent publisher to create the first erotic magazine for women. This show obviously has a lot to say about gender politics. I think it has a great amount to say about generational politics. Why was this the great setting for the ideas you wanted to like kind of talk about with the show?
To be honest, I think the ideas followed the setting. I was actually just interested in these real magazines when I found out about them, and about the workplaces that existed back in the 70s, and about this idea, you know, that feminists and pornographers banded together to create these things. It just felt like really unlikely bedfellows. And so, you know, once I just started researching that, all of the ideas kind of just naturally came out of that unique setting that really existed.
So one of my things watching it, like I said, giving myself away, the generational stuff I find really fascinating, because I feel like it reminds me, I'll humble brag, but I interviewed Jake Johnson about this as well. And I was like, it reminded him, the Doug and Joyce relationship reminds me of like Don and Peggy on Mad Men, when he's like, that's what the money is for. Because I feel like he is like got this really cynical, or just like, this is the way the world is, and Joyce is trying to like make it better. I mean, make it better, and for lack of a better word. How did you think of it? Like, was that something you thought about, like that kind of like get off my lawn old man versus like idealist younger person?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's this kind of age-old conflict between the people who become artists to kind of spread their message, and the people who are financing them. and it happens in all of our lives. We're always beholden to the person who makes money, and your art will no longer exist if it isn't reaching like a broad number of people. So it just felt like this very timely thing to talk about. Yes. So yes, it was very much.
No, I was gonna say, do you have a side? Do you think Joyce is right or Doug is right in those aspects of it? I guess.
I mean, I think I started out life as a Joyce, and I think as I've gotten older and wiser, I've become a Doug. Frankly, I think I was, at least last season, the voice of Doug in the writers' room. I remember before we wrote the 108 Dick Cavett episode, we all watched Susan Brown Miller on Dick Cavett debating Hugh Hefner. And at the end, I think I said, what a good job Hugh Hefner did. And literally, I think people booed me. There was like because everyone hated him so much. And I think I've come to the other side. I really do see both sides of it.
Yeah, that's so funny. I think that I could see that too. That's why I was certainly when I watched, I get that sense as well. I guess for Doug and Joyce, I'm sure it seems like another show maybe would have had them try to be a will they won't they couple, or like a romantic aspect, like a Sam and Diane on Cheers certainly comes to mind. The show doesn't do that, to its credit, and I think it's really great for their relationship. But was there pressure, or did you think about like pairing them up as like a couple, or was that ever an idea?
It was always something that I knew I did not want to do. It was interesting. I mean, we would get, I think people just assume that is something that you're going to do. So as we were casting, it was like, we would just get comments, I guess, maybe we should, find somebody who has chemistry with Joyce, but it was never anything that I was pressured into. And, when Jake came on, he also felt strongly, it's kind of how I knew we were on the same page. We both felt strongly that they shouldn't be in a romance. And it just felt like a dated way, I guess, to kind of conceive of a show. And I don't know, I spend more time at work with the people I work with than with my family sometimes. And I feel like we have different relationships. I just think it's something that you've seen less and is more fun to explore. And, I just don't even know what those stories would be.
No, I think it's great the way it is. It's always, I think it's a good thing. One, I know, obviously, like we said, like Joyce has, is a journalist and editor, like, trying to create her own magazine, obviously. What I saw one of the responses, I think, about the show is how authentic a lot of the vitriol she faced from like hate mail that like literally was mailed to her, obviously, because you're talking about the 70s. I guess, can you talk about like, how you decided to portray, the hatred that she receives, basically, and like, like how you were like, not, I mean, I hazard to say like inspired, but like what did you do? Like, how did you kind of like think about like that and how the response to her would be?
Sure. I mean, like a lot of things, we were interested in what's happening now and how to tie that back to the 70s. So the truth is, I don't actually know how female journalists experienced public vitriol in the 70s, but I guess I was just more interested in looking at the 70s with a current lens. So, I mean, we had our assistants go through Twitter and find all the threats that people would publicly make to female journalists. And then we kind of repurposed them and put them, wrote them out. And the first time Ophelia saw them was when she was shooting the scene. And it was, it's a lot. It's really shocking to realize how much hate is coming at women still today, more so, I think, probably because of how anonymous it all is, and how easy it is. I'm sure it was a lot more effort back then to, find a stamp and you have to get the address. Probably just kept your hate to yourself if it was casual.
Have you heard from like female journalists who have watched it and have been like, yes, that feels very authentic, sadly?
I think I saw something about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
That it felt authentic. And I mean, I guess that's good, but also sad.
Yeah. One of the things I also love about the show is I feel like your storytelling is incredibly economical and also like in a hyperdrive that I really appreciated. Like one of my friends was like, oh, the season finale almost feels like a season 3 finale, and that it like jumps so far. It just like it just resets the narrative in such a fashion. Can you talk about like taking those kind of chances with the story and like how, like why you felt like that was a great place to end it with like Doug and Joyce, especially? Like, I just thought that was like very unexpected as a viewer, because I think, like I said, like it just felt like something you would see like a few years from now, maybe on the show. So like seeing it now is like exciting.
I mean, I think it speaks to my own undiagnosed ADHD that I just get bored a lot when I watch TV, and especially some half-hour comedies. I think that they rehash the same dynamics over and over, and I understand why that's done, because you just want to keep a show on the air as long as possible. I personally just find myself tuning out. I feel like I just end up watching things that are much more serialized, things that, dramas, and so I just was attracted to doing something that had some sort of, propulsive forward motion, I guess.
Did you, how did that, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, how have you thought about season 2? Obviously, since the finale, you guys were picked up for a second season and stuff. So like, how have you thought about like how you want to jump from there into season 2, I guess? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, we're in the writer's room now. We've had our first week. And I would say that season 2 is developing similarly. It really does feel like a serialized show still. I would say even more so in season 2. And we're really making an effort not to reset them and not to just make it the same thing again, where it's just like a bunch of underdogs against the world. I think we're trying something interesting and different and cool, and it all feels like, I would say even more serialized because we have less world building to do this season.
You also already have the characters in place, certainly, and like beyond Joyce and Doug, as you said, like Ophelia and Jake, the casting is incredible. Again, can you talk about like did you flesh out more as the season went on and you had the actors in place? Was that something where like, oh, we should really do more with like Adara's character or whatever going forward, because they were so good that you were seeing how good they were? Like, how did you kind of think about that with the cast? Because it feels like the supporting parts are incredibly well fleshed out.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Making the pilot was so instructive, and it was just so helpful to see that Idara and Jake had this incredible chemistry, and we knew we wanted to write to that. And also for Bambi and Richie and Shelley, we just felt like we knew which storylines we wanted to concentrate on. And so we were definitely making an effort to write to their strengths, which is the benefit of having shot a pilot. Yeah.
And then what, I guess for you, like, what is the best response you've heard about the show? Or like, what have you been like excited about, like from, now that people have obviously seen it, all the episodes are on HBO Max and stuff?
I don't know if I can pick. It's just been so nice. I feel like we've had uniformly positive responses basically to the show. I've heard about mothers and daughters watching it together, which is so nice. We're like uniting generations. I'm really surprised. And what I think is also cool is that, I'm told that a lot of men are watching it too, which I think is nice to be able to do a show that isn't alienating, a show about feminism that isn't alienating an entire gender, that we're able to kind of talk about these ideas in a nuanced way that attracts, more people.
But did that surprise you that it landed like that though? Like, obviously you were like, are the driving, creator of it. Like, were you surprised that like men were like, not get away from me to this show? Because I don't think they have, it, speaking from personal experience at least.
I wasn't surprised because we tested it. We tested the pilot. And once we tested the pilot, I was like, we had just such a good response from men that, yeah, I think that they appreciated living in the 70s in a time when you could have conversation without a fear of saying something that offends someone. And I think they appreciated, obviously I'm generalizing, but the 10 men in our Zoom appreciated that. I think in another show, Jake's character would have been disgusting. He would have been a pervert. The show would have existed as a way for like feminists to take down the man. And I think they appreciated having a more nuanced portrayal of a man that was, that I think some people feel like is lacking, I guess, in their entertainment. So after that, I knew. Or I hoped that that we fulfilled the promise.
No, I think you did. Minx, all the episodes are streaming on HBO Max. Ellen Rappaport, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Cinco Paul, creator of Schmigadoon and a Grammy nominee for Schmigadoon as well. I read in another interview that you had the general idea for the series like 25 years ago. Why was this the right time for the show to come together, I guess, after 25 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was several things. I had spent a lot of time in the animation world, And, we had these overall deals, we were exclusive. So I was really just focused on that. So that's a big reason it was set on the shelf for so long. But also the TV landscape has changed even in the last 5 years, but let alone the last 25 years. And so there was room for a show as weird as this, the quote unquote big swing that, we heard after several of our pitch meetings. This is too big of a swing for us. But fortunately, Apple was there and it wasn't too big of a swing for them.
When you heard that kind of feedback, did you ever go, maybe were you ever like, I should take a smaller swing with this, or like do the same thing, or no, you're always like full board on this concept?
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I don't think there's any way to turn it into a bunt or whatever the baseball terminology would be.
That works. Yeah.
It is what it is. And so, and I had a feeling at some of the places we went that like, this is not going to land here, but fortunately Apple was looking for a musical.
So you wrote all the songs for Schmigadoon, obviously, and they have to recall like, a specific sense of like a classic musical or musical theater, but not parody necessarily those songs. So I found that really fascinating because it seems incredibly tricky. And I guess, how did you kind of think about that? And were you ever like, oh, this is a great tune and melody, and oh wait, I'm actually just now thinking of something else that already exists? Like, how did you kind of balance that from a songwriting perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there were conversations with the legal department occasionally. But a lot of it was just, I love these musicals so much, as you can imagine. But also, I sat down at the piano and played through all the scores of all these shows just so I could get them in my bones. And occasionally, there are some very specific references. But I think some of the best songs in the shows are the ones that you're like, I'm not sure what that's referencing, but it feels right, and that was, there's a mix. Some there's a Do Re Mi parody that's very clearly a parody, but for the most part it was trying to like get the vibe of it, and also I studied the lyrics. Oscar Hammerstein's, we're firmly in Rodgers and Hammerstein for most of the show, and so studying those lyrics and seeing what tendencies were, and those sort of things.
At the risk of asking you to pick a favorite, what's your favorite one of the songs that you got to write?
Oh boy, that's really hard. I mean, one of the ones that brings me joy every time I watch it is the song "With All of Your Heart," that Ariana DeBose performs with a bunch of tap dancing kids. And very early on, I knew I wanted to sing with tap dancing kids, and this just turned out to be as magical as I'd hoped it'd be. And that's one of those songs that doesn't have an exact corollary, but it's kind of a mashup of a bunch of different ideas.
I read you also had the cast singing live on set. Obviously, you have all these incredibly talented singers and Broadway stars and Oscar winners and Ariana DeBose, future Oscar winners. It's incredible wealth of talent. But why was singing on set so important, I guess, for this show?
I mean, personally, I hate lip syncing. I see it whenever I see in a movie or a show they're talking and then they sing and suddenly it's like, wow, the quality really went up. Suddenly, I hate that. It sounds like they're in a studio, and so I felt like the best way to avoid that, let's have them sing live. And when you have Kristen Chenoweth and Jane Krakowski, Aaron Tveit, Ariana DeBose, all these amazing people, you can do that. And really 95% of the like solo or duo singing, because of COVID, ensemble stuff we couldn't do live, but everything else was done live. And they really appreciated that too, because I think it helps them as performers. Like they can really give a vocal acting performance that's not something that they recorded a month ago, So I think it was really helpful to the show in many ways.
So the show has a romance at the center that is at a crossroads, and then they're kind of like the main characters kind of split off and explore the other avenues. One of the things I was fascinated watching it is, how do you make sure, or how did you think about making sure the alternate suitors, as it were like believable enough as romantic options that the audience would be like, I could see this, but you don't want to make them too enticing that the audience is then pulled away from the central romance. The show does a great job of that, but I would love to know how you thought of it, because I'd imagine it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trickiest one is Emma Tate, the character played by Ariana DeBose, her romance with Josh, played by Michael Key, because that's really the most fleshed out character that a romance. The other ones are tropes, but we get a little deeper into the trope with her character, and so I thought like, oh no, it's like right. I was like, I'm seeing them fall in love, and I'm like believing it. I'm like, oh no, is like she too likable, or and because Ariana just shines, and but that's why we did all these flashbacks, to be honest, because so much of our Cecily and Keegan were separate so much during the season that we really wanted to establish, oh no, this is a real couple that you should root for. They really do love and care about each other. So that was the place where it got the most dangerous, I think. But then also it makes it more meaningful when he has to actually tell her, you know what, it's not you, it's Melissa's the one for me.
Yeah. Did you have to do is that a thing where you're trial and erroring in the edit and stuff? Or are you like watching it back, and like, do you test? How'd you figure out like how far to push it? Like you said, like the Emma and Josh of it versus like, pulling back, and because you don't want to like demonize obviously Emma. She's not like a villain, so like you can't like just knock her out by being like, well, she stinks, right? Like you gotta keep her like enticing for the audience, but also not too much. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it was playing with it in post sometimes, looking at the edit, and but it was also sort of in the writing, as we're shooting and we're discovering things. I just said, okay, maybe we pull back a little bit here or there, but yeah, it was a fine line to walk here and there.
Yeah, no, and it works. So I think that's good. So this is a show, obviously, like I said, you had this in your head for like, 25 years or whatever. Did it end up like, does the end result, did it come out exactly as you had expected, or like how did it change, like seeing it now and like having obviously making it, like how much did it change from like what you initially expected, I guess?
Well, I mean, early on, and even when we first started pitching, I hadn't thought of it as like, oh, this is 6 episodes or even 8 episodes. I thought like, oh, maybe this could be episodic, and every week we're in a different musical, but once Apple signed on and they said, well, we can see, we're thinking of this as a more limited amount of episodes. That's when I really had to dive in and say like, okay, there's a definite end after, we actually wrote 8 episodes and then they pulled it back to 6. And so then I had to do some quick rewriting. But then there was sort of thinking, okay, like what is a story that can be told in these 6 half-hour episodes, it's meaningful. And so that was the biggest change, and thinking about like, what are the characters' arcs going to be, because we have a shorter amount of time to tell the story.
How much did it help having, obviously Barry Sonnenfeld directed all the episodes, how much did it help having him, one director, I guess, as the voice of this with you on it, or like versus like having separate? I guess you can't imagine how he had separate. Yeah. I mean, that was so great. A first-time showrunner here, and so it was great to have such an experienced director at the helm, and with such a clear visual style, so distinct and so fun and so perfect for the show. I mean, it was helpful in every way. Barry, however, hates musicals. Turns out, found out like first day on the set. By the way, I don't like musicals. I'm like, oh, okay. But that sort of yin and yang kind of worked. He was the Josh to my Melissa throughout the shoot. So that's great. Funny. And last thing, I guess, obviously, like, it was a very well received. I don't know, season 2, I'm sure people have been asking you about it a lot, or just in general. I can't imagine you could say anything pro or con, but have you thought about season 2 and like what you would want to do if you have another opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, what I can say is that I had always conceived of this show as multiple seasons, and I would love to do a season 2. I have lots of ideas for season 2 that I think fans of the show would be very excited about. So we'll see.
That's great.
Crossed,
fingers crossed. I have my fingers and toes crossed. Cinco Paul, creator of Schmigadoon on Apple TV, plus all the episodes are streaming now from season 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Stefani Robinson, executive producer of What We Do in the Shadows, and a 4-time Emmy nominee for Atlanta and What We Do in the Shadows. So season 2 of What We Do in the Shadows, I think I would say took a cultural leap, perhaps. Obviously, like way more Emmy nominations, best comedy series nomination. The Jackie Daytona episode, which I know you wrote, was like a viral zeitgeisty kind of thing. Going in off that success, going into season 3, how did that affect the approach that you guys took to the show, knowing that it was kind of like burgeoning from a buzz standpoint, I guess?
I don't think it affected the approach at all. And I think if I'm getting my timeline correct, I think we were already writing season 3 when all those nominations were sort of were coming out, and we were learning the news that, you know, we had so much positive press. So I think we were already doing our own thing, sort of business as usual. So if anything, it was just sort of like the gravy on top of working on such a great show. And it's such a great writer's room in terms of that creative process that we really just sort of focus on making each other laugh. So it was just, if anything, it gave us excuse to celebrate, you know, to celebrate that. But in terms of the actual making of the show, not much change.
When you're doing the making, when you're in the writer's room and stuff, what makes for a great episode of What We Do in the Shadows? Like, what do you guys think of as like key components of that, I guess?
That's a really good question. I feel like our approach, Paul Sims and I, who I run the show with, we are very adamant that people just throw out the stupidest, silliest ideas that they can possibly think of. And so many, I feel like, of our great episodes come from ideas that feel just very sort of flippant in the writer's room, maybe at the time, and that don't have a lot of thought, not a lot of like story-wise, but I think we really encourage writers to just say, hey, stupidest thing, it can be as dumb as, you know, vampires need to go to the dentist. They've chipped a fang, like something that really doesn't feel like it has much meat at all. And then really sort of forcing ourselves to take maybe those sillier premises and make it actually feel a little bit more emotional and have more of those legs in terms of a story. So I feel like in terms of a great What We Do in the Shadows episode, there's a little element of that stupidity that I'm referring to. Like it can't feel, I think, too deep. At the same time, I think we love how cinematic the show is. I think the more blood, guts, flying, prosthetics, really interesting character choices in terms of like creature characters, visual effects, and the special effects, I think where we can actually, like, when we give ourselves the opportunity rather to create that atmosphere that feels more cinematic and feels actually like it's a horror movie, and twist that sort of horror comedy knife a little bit more, I think that's some of the more satisfying episodes as well.
Do you guys have like a list? Like, do you keep like a list of like either horror things or concepts or like creatures that you're like, oh, that maybe could be worked down the line? Like how deep do you think? Like, do you have
totally.
a Google Doc or something?
Yeah, we think very deeply about those things, and it sounds sort of silly to say out loud, but we do keep a running list of just, as you said, horror creatures like mummies, ghosts, ghouls, leprechauns, and really, you know, have to find ways to make those work if they do work. So there's always a running list. At least season 1, we did a lot of conversation about the rules of our vampires, sort of juxtaposing them with the vampires that sort of exist in media. Currently, how are our vampires different? How are they similar? So there's a lot of conversation about, I guess, the lore and mythology about not only our characters, but just creatures in their universe in general. So there's, yeah, lots of conversation about that.
That's awesome. So you mentioned like vampires in media. Obviously, this season you had there was a Twilight kickball spoof, which I know was very well received, and I think qualifies before what you're saying. Like, it's very silly, but very fun, and just so specific and detailed. And I really love that. And I thought, like, down to like the music selection, I guess. Yeah. So like, why was is that something that you had maybe thought of previously, and why was this the right time for it? Or did that just kind of like, were you guys just like, oh, this would be great to do? Like, how did that kind of come together?
I feel like that's probably a little bit of both. I think Twilight anything has been discussed since the first season of the show, whether it was trying to beg any of the actors to come make a cameo or just even referencing Twilight. And I think we in the pilot even do reference sort of glitter and the sort of glittery skin that comes from Twilight. But I feel like that's one of those ones where we probably discussed for many seasons just doing a vampire kickball. I don't know about kickball specifically, but there's a great scene, if anyone hasn't seen it, in Twilight, where they play a game of baseball that is both so I don't know, just so ridiculously delicious and absurd and funny and very fascinating. It's fun to watch just if you have time to watch it. But that was one of those things that just I feel like is so much a part nowadays in the fabric of that vampire lore, at least in the contemporary conversation. So it was just, I think, low-hanging fruit to make fun of. Again, one of those sort of easy opportunities to sort of grab at and run with, but we obviously need to find a story and a reason for those moments to work. And I think, this was probably just one of those, one of the right times for it. I don't think we thought of it much deeper than that.
I mean, it's great. Have you ever heard from anybody involved with the Twilight movies about that, or just in general the show, I guess?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It's I feel like the Twilight of it all, I feel like informs the show in such a weird way, and it sort of coexists with it. It's kind of nicely, but I'm really super happy with how that scene in particular turned out. Like you said, that being able to use the sort of music as well to sort of make it very specific for Twilight fans, I think was super important. And in that way, I think we're really happy about it. Yeah,
it's very fun. You mentioned like the vampire lore too in the show. So you have like season 3 ends with like Colin, the energy vampire. It's a big swing. I guess we don't need to spoil it, though. Fans could watch it. I guess why was that important to do with that? And like, how did you guys land on kind of wrapping up season 3 with that kind of result, I guess?
Yeah, I think that that's just, I guess, has been our approach for ending the seasons, like ending on a big cliffhanger that we don't necessarily know how we're going to wrap up yet. We like to paint ourselves in a corner in that way and take a really big swing that I feel like fans maybe aren't necessarily ready for, and then trying to find a way to piece together a season in that way becomes a little bit of like a Sudoku puzzle for us. But I think it's ultimately, I feel like those constraints that we build for ourselves actually force us to be more creative in the next season. But I think that the sort of the big moment, I won't spoil it either, at the end of the season with Colin, I think we were interested in maybe resettling and reshifting the relationships that the vampires have with each other in the house. It's very much, it is a mockumentary and our group of vampires living together, but I think the core of it is very much a family comedy. And we really do see the characters as families and the way that they're interacting with each other and the sort of shifting of alliances as well with those characters. So I think that sort of big moment with Colin at the end was just a way for us, obviously to get that sort of dramatic moment that's just satisfying, but also it gives us an opportunity to, I think, shift the social standing in the household and give us an opportunity to sort of reframe some of those relationships and go somewhere new in terms of the emotional relationships of the characters. You mentioned like writing yourselves into a corner, basically. So when you come back from season 4, and obviously it's coming back later this year, but do you have like going into that where did you have thoughts on it? Do you like wait to see like how the response is? Like, how do you guys kind of like work on how you get yourselves out of those kind of corners, let's say? Well, the truth of the matter is we're not done with the end of the season by the time we start shooting. So a lot of the time we know where we're going while we're shooting. And then while we're on set, me and Paul and a few other writers will write a finale episode. And so we don't give it much thought in terms of the next season coming, but we know that we're sort of building towards this moment. And then just frankly, the being on set and focusing on the production aspect of everything becomes the focus, and we actually don't have the opportunity really to think back into like how this will affect the season or next season and the next group of episodes. And so in that way we don't think too much about it, but again, that I think is the fun of the show. So when we do sit down with each other and really start breaking the next season, it is a challenge. And like I said, and I think I'm a big believer in this, and I know Paul Sims is as well, is that the more constraints actually breed more creativity, because we are so locked into a certain way of doing things because of story or because of set or because they're vampires and we can't shoot them out in the daylight. Like, it actually forces us as writers to become as creative as possible versus, hey, it's open-ended, go wherever you want, which I think we both find, Paul and I, to be less motivating in terms of just writing jokes and story.
Mm-hmm. Stefani Robinson, that's great. Stefani Robinson, executive producer of What We Do in the Shadows on FX in season 3. You can watch now all the episodes. Thank you, Stefani.
Thank you.
Patrick Schumacker, executive producer of Abbott Elementary. Jennifer Flanz, executive producer of The Daily Show. Ellen Rapoport, creator of Minx. Cinco Paul, creator of Schmigadoon. And Stefani Robinson, executive producer of What We Do the shadows. Thank you all so much for doing this. I wanted to start just broadly. What is your most important job, would you say, as an executive producer or showrunner on a daily basis that you are like, this is something I definitely need to focus on? And Patrick, I will start with you.
I think my job, as it was in season 1, as is now in season 2, is to be a facilitator for Quinta Brunson, who is the show's creator. And at the end of the day, the buck stops with her, but she's, performing 4 different duties, being first on the call sheet, creator of the show, executive producer, et cetera, et cetera. And so she's kind of everywhere all at once. And it's my job, along with Justin Halpern's, to try and make sure that the show is consistently in line with what she sees as most important. So yeah, I am a facilitator.
It's great. Jennifer, how about yourself?
I don't want to steal Patrick's answer.
You can, it's okay.
No, it really it is just to facilitate, making sure that we are, coming at the show every day with Trevor's point of view, and it's something that we're proud of, keeping funny in mind the whole time, but also making sure that we're choosing topics that are of interest to our staff, but also our audience, and kind of keeping it all together. Yeah.
Cinco, how about you? You were a first-time showrunner here for Schmigadoon. So what was your experience like?
Yeah, it was quite the learning experience. I think a lot of it, I realize, is about just communicating tone and the heart of the show, and sort of keeping everybody focused on that and sort of big picture stuff, because it's so easy to get caught up in the little details. I mean, I was so stunned at like the amount of questions I had to answer and decisions I had to make. It was incredible. But I realized that, oh, my job is like, I kind of overall like know what I want the show to be and have the vision for it, and just trying to communicate that to everybody, I think, was maybe ultimately my most important job.
That's good. Stephanie, how about you? We're obviously many hats on what we do in the shadows. So what do you?
Yeah, I agree with everyone else's answer. I think there's so much truth to all those answers that I think I would add as well, because what we do in the shadows is an incredibly collaborative production, and it has to be it's an ensemble show. There's lots of improvising. The camera is a specific way. Again, the sort of the production value attached to that. I think it's just making sure everyone feels encouraged and confident. And I think that this is one of the shows you can start to tell if someone doesn't feel confident or supported. And I think that's one of the biggest things, even from the writer's room standpoint too, making sure that the writers do feel like they know what they're doing, but actually have their own voice and feel like they can actually take big swings. And I think that's probably true all around, that everyone feels like they can take big swings and be as creatively involved as possible, and want to be creatively involved.
But I guess you all have been doing, like, in different capacities, doing this for a long time, or like we said, Cinco, for first time, like, what's the best advice you've gotten about this like role? I mean, it's obviously so, like you all are saying, there's a lot of balls and plates to spin. So I guess, Patrick, how about you? Like, what's the best advice you've gotten about being executive producer or showrunner?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, this is such a personal one, but I continue to, as I'm sure many people in my position do, but I constantly suffer from imposter syndrome and fraud complex. And finally, it took me many years for several writers with much better perspectives, much healthier perspectives, to tell me that at the end of the day, everybody wants you to do a great job and is rooting for you, and not to panic. And I mean, this is it's all part of like the facilitator role, but like I am someone who does have a tendency to constantly panic, and I think over time I've had to unlearn that and not just assume that everybody is out to get me. So that's probably the best advice. I'm a lot healthier now.
So that's good. That sounds like it for sure. Jennifer, how about you? What's the best advice you've gotten, I guess?
No, I'm trying to think if I've gotten any advice. I think the thing I tell myself every day is just have a good time. And if we're having fun, if I'm having fun, most of the staff is having fun. If it feels like we're having fun in the building, then it's going to translate to the screen. And I think to make a show every day, you need to have a good time doing it. So that is, and I kind of make my attention span issues work for me because there's so many balls up in the air all the time. Just keep going, bouncing.
That's good. Ellen, we're so glad you're back. My question is,
I had a tech crisis.
Totally fine. That's great. No, it's totally fine. You look good. This is going to be fine. Your video is great. My question, I guess, to the group was like your best advice you've gotten as a creator or showrunner, and I would love to hear what you have to say.
Sure. I mean, I think that at some point I was told that production would just be a rolling series of calamities, and that I should reset my mindset and not expect things to be good ever, but that there will be like a certain number of calamities a day, and that if I was under that it was a success. So once I did that, I was like, oh, there were only 4 crises, and that feels great.
What's the peak number of calamities would you say that you can handle?
I mean, I think 4 is good on the same day. It kind of depends what they are.
Seems like good. That's good. Cinco, how about you?
I can't remember who told me this, but it was sort of, take all the blame and give everyone else all the credit that you can. And because ultimately, right, you're going to get your fair share of credit. So spread the wealth as much as you can. And I've always tried to do that. And because, right, we're one writer in the room. There's people don't realize exactly how collaborative it is. And so it's always best to try to be benevolent and kind in that way, and giving it'll pay you back in a big way.
Yeah, and Stephanie, last but not least, certainly.
Someone told me this, and it sounds bleak, I guess, when you say it out loud, but there's some truth to it. But it's ultimately like when you are put in this position that it's almost like you're running your own company. And it is really up to you to sort of set the tone. And this is just sort of, again, piggybacking on what everybody else said, but it's up to you to set the tone and to be very clear about your boundaries in terms of like, this is what we will do when there is calamity, when there is crisis. This is how we respond. This is how we approach speaking to one another, behaving on set, being creative around one another too. It's again such a bleak way of describing it, because it's like I'm thinking about a company seems like the exact opposite of what we're lucky enough to be able to do, which is a largely creative job. But I mean, sort of seeing it that way and knowing that people are looking up to you to set the tone top down in terms of playfulness, in terms of what's appropriate, not appropriate. I think that it's pretty helpful advice.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It certainly makes sense to me. And I guess last thing, all of these shows are, I think, incredibly well received, not just because you're here, like the fan of these shows as well. Like I said, how much do you guys pay attention to what the audience is saying about the show? Like, do you try to avoid that, or do you like not just reviews? I mean, like the audience response and beyond ratings, I guess, like how people talk about it and stuff. Patrick, how about you?
I think that Abbott is almost unavoidable at this point. If you go on social media, like I'm on Twitter the most, and TikTok a little bit, and it's like a double-edged sword. But I mean the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and I am so grateful for that. Everybody who works on the show is. It's kind of, I mean, honestly, the TikTok thing, like when it started taking off on TikTok, I was told as a man in his 40s that is that means you are a success, because now it has gone viral on TikTok. So it is kind of unavoidable, but I think really the thing that I've had to stay away from is like people like sliding into my DMs like with pitches, where I'm just like, I have to be like, you can't do that, like, or I just can't respond, because people have a lot of ideas about where the show should go, which is great because they're invested clearly enough to take time out of their day to come up with storylines. but yeah, I mean, you just have to kind of try and tune it out for the most part, I think. And we get our mantra this season is just everybody, if they can, like, put their heads down and keep doing what we were doing, because we didn't, we kind of worked in a vacuum, other than obviously feedback from the studio and the network. We were kind of working in a vacuum, and we like what we did. So we want to just keep trying to do that without too much outside interference.
Jennifer, how about you? Obviously, the Daily Show is daily, and like you guys are very plugged in online and stuff. So it's a slightly different beast. But I mean, how much do you pay attention to like what the audience is responding to on even on a daily basis?
I mean, we pay attention because it's so much of the show is what it is on social and digital, and but pay attention not in a way that would sway anything that we produce, but it's nice to see what's resonating with fans. But for every like amazing video we put out that gets a great response, we put out another one that, maybe doesn't get such a great response, or, we just try and stay true to like what the show is and what we believe. And I think if you have a strong moral compass and you know what the show's point of view is, then you just stick to that, and can't be swayed that much by like ratings and likes and shares and all those things. Although it is nice when something goes really huge and you're like, oh, cool, we loved that thing. But it also sucks when you have something that you love and you're like, oh, nobody wanted to see that one, huh? Okay.
It's always the rip, right? It does.
Yeah, I mean, like you can only, you can't get that up or down based on the audience, I think. But as long as you don't get canceled, then
no, that's fine. Ellen, how about you? This Minx obviously first season here, so like, what were you like? How much do you take in what people are saying about the show?
I think I am taking in all of the praise and none of the criticisms. To be honest, I do like it's kind of how I feel about critical reviews. I like do a quick scan and I'm like, okay, good to know, and then try not to really take it in too much. I just feel like, getting into either a positive or a negative feedback loop isn't really helpful for anyone. So, like Patrick, we were able to create our show in like this, kind of anonymous little bubble, which I think is the best way to do it. And I think, as far as our second season writer's room goes, as far as how much we're talking about fan response, I would say it's like 0, so we're really not letting it dictate story, which I think is the best way to operate.
Yeah, definitely. Cinco, how about you?
Yeah, I discovered I'm unhealthily curious about all that. And so I ultimately had to come up with a mantra, which is, we made this show for the people who like it. And that's really, I think, the way I've moved forward. I mean, I am curious. I'm on Twitter and I'm searching Schmigadoon, and it's very easy because if you search Schmigadoon, you will definitely come up with like, they're talking about the show, nothing else. But I sort of move forward. And just like Ellen says, like, you can't, that's not going to inform the way your vision of the show or the writer's room or any of that. But it is interesting to find stuff, especially the positive, people who just like, this was a dark time in my life and I watched Schmigadoon and it got me through, Schmigadoon was just what I needed. Those sort of things like build me up and make me say, okay, that's great. Let's, makes me want to do more of it.
Yeah. And Stephanie, last but not least, how about you?
Yeah, I don't think we spend too much time combing through fan responses, although I feel like a lot like Patrick, I feel like it's sort of interrupted our lives in a major way. I think the response that we've got, I think that we're sent a lot of art, a lot of fan art, fan fiction, people make a lot of merch, and that's sort of the thing that we wouldn't necessarily be looking for, but we're so lucky enough to receive and be a part of. And that level of excitement, I've never experienced on a different television show, to have, I think, an audience want to make art based off the art that they experience because of what we made. That's a very clunky way of saying that. I think it's really cool that something that we did, that we spent time doing, and that was a labor of love for us, inspired someone else to take the time to draw their own art and their own interpretation and to make their own trinkets and their own fan fiction based off of it. I think that's really cool. And I'm very honored by that and proud of that. But otherwise, we don't spend so much time reading criticisms or the praise, although I'm sure they're out there and it would be easy to find, as Cinco said.
Yeah, you gotta no searching of the show names. I guess that's a great way to start. Cinco, you gotta maybe like block that term maybe for your
Everybody
tweet.
is telling me this. I'm hopeless. I feel bad.
Let's just all make a pact to only search each other's shows. And
That's good. That would work.
Yeah.
I call Schmigadoon.
Okay.
It's like, don't call me if you read anything bad. It's gonna happen every day.
I don't feel like everybody wants Minx. You're going to see a lot of weird stuff. It's an interesting term to search. Be careful.
We have to wrap up there, but this is so much fun. All of you and your shows are incredible. One last time, Patrick Schumacker, Abbott Elementary, Jennifer Flanz, The Daily Show, Ellen Rappaport, Minx, Cinco Paul, Schmigadoon, and Stefani Robinson, What We Do in the Shadows. Great shows all. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you for having us.